Comic books are the only place where a guy in a purple tuning fork hat can look at you in the eye and make you feel like a piece of cosmic dust without it being a total joke. Live action movies are great for seeing famous actors pretend to have superpowers, but when it comes to the sheer unadulterated essence of a true bad guy, I would say the printed page wins every single time. That's because movies have to worry about things like physics and budget meetings and actors needing to eat lunch, which really drags down the vibe when you're trying to destroy a galaxy. Meanwhile, comics don't have those problems because ink is cheap and the animation doesn't have a CGI supervisor telling it that a giant floating head is too expensive to render. We're going to dive deep into why the ink and paper version of villainy is the gold standard that Hollywood keeps trying and often failing to copy. Grab your long boxes and let's get into the nitty-gritty of why these paper-thin jerks are actually the most three-dimensional characters in fiction, because it's time to stop pretending that a cloud in a movie is better than a giant in a helmet. Phase 1, the visual foundation. Ever noticed how movie villains often look like they just walked out of a very expensive tactical gear shop? That's because movies are terrified of looking silly, but comics lean into the weirdness until it becomes iconic. One of these visual foundations include 1. Zero physical constraints. Gravity is a total buzzkill that only exists to ruin the cool designs of artists who actually have a vision. In the world of film, you have to find a way to make a character look real, which usually means putting a person in a suit or covering them with digital dots. If a character design is too wacky, the audience starts giggling and suddenly your big threat looks like a mascot for a failed cereal brand. But comics just ignore all that. An artist could draw something that would make a structural engineer weep because they only have to worry about if it looks cool on a 2D surface. This freedom lets creators build monsters that are truly alien, grotesque, or just plain impossible. If you want to see what happens when an artist decides that necks are for losers, check out MODOK. George Tarleton got turned into a mental organism designed only for killing, which apparently involves becoming a massive head that needs a hover chair to get around. In a movie, this looks like a deleted scene from a fever dream, but in a comic, it's pure horror. Artists use heavy shadows and gross skin textures to make him look like a biological nightmare instead of a beach ball with a face. He fills up the whole page, looming over the heroes like a fleshy moon that also happens to be very good at math. On top of that, he has these tiny little arms and legs that just dangle there, reminding you that he doesn't need to walk when he can just blast you with brainwaves. What makes it even crazier is that the medium makes you take this giant Eggman seriously through the sheer power of stylized art. You can't do that in live action without the fact of feeling like they're stuck at some kind of Renaissance fair. At least he never has to worry about dealing with a double chin. Number 2, iconic visual design. You should be able to tell who a villain is just by looking at their shadow, or else the designer probably needs to go back to school. This is the silhouette test, and comic villains pass it with flying colors because they aren't afraid of looking like a Saturday morning cartoon. Movie studios often get nervous about bright colors and weird shapes, so they end up giving everyone black leather or muted gray armor. This results in villains who look like they all shop at the same global domination outlet mall, and we know that's kind of boring. However, comics go the opposite way, using bold shapes and wild outfits that stay in your brain forever. Galactus is the king of this, mainly because he's a giant purple space god who wears a hat that looks like it could pick up satellite radio from another dimension. When he first showed up in the movies, they were so scared of his outfit they just turned him into a giant angry space cloud, which is basically the cinematic version of a shrug. But in the comics, his design by Jack Kirby is a masterpiece of why not? He's huge, he's purple, and he looks like he's about to eat your planet while looking fabulous. The contrast between his bright armor and the blackness of space makes him pop off the page like a neon sign for the apocalypse. I think it's awesome because the comic doesn't just try to explain why a cosmic entity needs a giant G on his chest, it just lets him be magnificent and an oversized titan. That's why I always argue that if you can't be recognized by your headwear from 3 galaxies away, are you even a threat? Phase 2, the psychological core. A good villain isn't just a cool outfit, they're a walk-and-talk disaster area of pure bad vibes and even worse life choices. Comics have secret ways of letting us peek into their broken brains that movies just can't match without a lot of awkward whispering. Number 1, internal monologue, aka caption box. Movies have to use things like talking to a cat or long speeches to a tied up hero to explain what a villain is thinking, and I think that it usually feels pretty forced. Comics have this magical thing called a caption box that lets us read the villain's thoughts like we're eavesdropping on their private diary. This creates a level of intimacy that is actually kind of disturbing because you're forced to see the world through their warped perspective. You don't need a hero to be in the room for the villain to reveal their plan or their feelings. The text just sits there on the page, letting the ego of the bad guy flow directly into your eyes. Lex Luthor is the poster child for why this works, especially in books like All-Star Superman. On the outside, he looks like a successful businessman who just happens to be bald and angry, but the caption boxes show us the sheer mountain-sized scale of his narcissism. He doesn't think he's the bad guy. He thinks he's the hero of a story where an alien is stealing all the credit. We get to read his cold, calculated thoughts as he looks at the world with utter disgust, believing he's the only one smart enough to save it. What's even more clever is that we see his genius and his pettiness at the same time without him saying a single word out loud. It's like being trapped in an elevator with a very smart person who also happens to be a total jerk. It's much easier to plan world domination when you don't have to worry about a monologue being interrupted by a straying batarang. Number 2, the mirror effect. Villains often are just the hero if they had a really bad Tuesday and decided to make it everyone else's problem. Movies do this dark reflection thing for about 2 hours, but comics do it for 60 years, which lets the rivalry get way more personal and weird. The villain becomes a permanent shadow that follows the hero around, constantly poking at their specific insecurities and flaws. It's not just a one-off fight, it's a lifelong commitment to being an absolute hater. Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash, takes this to a level of pettiness that's honestly kind of impressive. He didn't start out wanting to rule the world, he started out as a superfan of Barry Allen who realized he was destined to be the villain and decided to lean into it. Here's a fun fact that I like. His suit is literally just Barry's suit with the colors flipped, which is the ultimate no you of fashion choices. But the real kicker is how the comics use time travel to let him ruin Barry's life in the smallest, most annoying ways possible. He didn't just kill Barry's mom. He also probably went back in time to make sure Barry missed his bus or tripped him in front of his crush. This kind of long-term obsessive hatred is something you can only really explore in a medium that doesn't have to wrap everything up by the time the popcorn runs out. Because imagine being so dedicated to a grudge that you literally rewrite history just to make someone have a slightly worse childhood. Phase 3, the narrative mechanics. The way a comic is actually built. The boxes, the gaps, the pages you have to turn changes how we feel the story in our gut. It turns the reader into an accomplice, making them participate in the villain's big moments. Number 1, pacing and the weight. In a movie, a director decides how long a scene lasts, but in a comic, you're the one holding the remote control. You can linger on a scary panel for 10 minutes or fly through a fight scene, which gives the reader a weird sense of control over the tension. The most powerful tool a comic creator has is the page turn, which is the ultimate wait for it moment in storytelling. You know something bad's coming, but you have to physically move your hand to see what carnage is on the next page. The Nightfall story, where Bane breaks Batman, is a masterclass in making the reader feel the exhaustion. Bane doesn't just show up and punch Bruce. He spends months letting all the inmates out of Arkham, so Batman has to work 24-hour shifts for weeks. By the time they actually fight, you can feel how tired Batman is just by how the panels are laid out. When you finally get to the end of the page and turn it, you're hit with the massive image of Bane snapping Batman's back over his knee. The crack sound is so big, it practically makes your own back hurt just looking at it. You can stare at that image as long as you want, letting the reality sink in that the hero actually lost. At least Bruce finally got a chance to lay down for a while, even if it wasn't a full body cast. Number 2, power scaling and stakes. Movies usually have to keep things somewhat grounded because seeing too many CGI beams of light makes the audience's brains turn off. Comics don't have that limit, so they could go from robbing a bank to punching the concept of time in the span of 3 issues. This lets villains operate on a scale that is genuinely hard to wrap your head around. When the stakes are the entire multiverse is being deleted, the villain feels like a god instead of just a guy in a costume. Thanos is a great example of how the comics take things way further than the movies ever could. In the MCU, he wanted to kill half of everyone because of a resource crisis, which is basically just a very extreme version of a town hall meeting. In the comics, he did it because he had a massive crush on Lady Death, who is a literal skeleton in a purple robe, and he wanted to impress her. He wasn't just fighting the Avengers, he was taking on the physical embodiments of things like eternity and order. He used the Infinity Gauntlet to turn his enemies into glass or Legos just because he could. The comic medium lets this look like beautiful, psychedelic art instead of a messy video game cutscene. It's hard to beat a guy who's literally trying to flirt with the Grim Reaper by deleting your zip code. Number 3, Rogues Gallery Dynamic. Most movies feature one villain at a time because trying to fit 6 of them into 2 hours is a recipe for a narrative train wreck, and Spider-Man No Way Home is the proof of that. Don't hate me, kids, even Spidey fans agree. Comics have the space to let villains hang out, form clubs, and talk trash about the hero behind their back. This makes the world feel lived in and dangerous, like the heroes trapped in a neighborhood where everyone wants to egg their house. The villains have their own relationships and beefs with each other, which adds a whole new layer of drama. The Sinister Six is the ultimate workplace collaboration for people who hate Spider-Man. You've got a guy with robot arms, a Birdman, a Sandman, an Electric Man, an Illusionist, and a Hunter, all deciding to put their egos aside for 5 minutes to jump one teenager. Watching them try to work together is hilarious, because they all think they should be the boss. In a comic, you can see how their powers overlap in a giant chaotic mess of panels that would cost $1 billion to film properly. It shows that the hero isn't just fighting a person, they're fighting a whole ecosystem of people who have nothing better to do than ruin their day. Phase 4, The Immortal Legacy. The biggest win for comic villains is that they never actually have to go away. They aren't tied to an actor's aging face or a studio's contract disputes. They are eternal ideas that just keep getting meaner. Number 1, What If Factor, aka Multiverse. In a movie, the bad guy almost always loses, because that's how movies work. But comics have the multiverse to play what if with our feelings. They could show us a world where the villain actually won and everything is terrible without having to reboot the whole franchise. This lets writers explore the darkest possible endings for our favorite heroes, which adds a lot of weight to the villain's threats. If you know there's a universe where the Joker actually killed everyone, he becomes way scarier in the main world. The Batman Who Laughs is the peak of this worst-case scenario storytelling. He's got a version of Bruce Wayne from a nightmare dimension who finally killed the Joker only to get infected by a toxin that turned him into a Jokerified version of himself. He has all of Batman's tactical brains, but none of his not murdering people rules. He looks like something that crawled out of a heavy metal album cover, and he's terrifying because he represents the hero's ultimate failure. The comics can spend years showing us how he dismantled his own world, proving that the villain's path is always just one bad decision away. Number 2, Longevity. A movie villain has about 2 hours to make an impression before they're usually thrown off a building or blown up. Comic villains have been around since the 1940s, giving them more time to develop a more real-life civilization. They can change with the times, evolving from silly pranksters into dark psychological monsters as the world around them gets grittier. This long history creates a deep, scarred relationship with the hero that you just can't fake in a single film. The Joker has been haunting Gotham for over 80 years, and he's changing more times than Andrew Tate's changed his Bugattis. He started as a scary murderer, became a goofy guy who built giant pies, and then turned into a chaotic force of nature that lives to prove life is a joke. Every new writer adds a new layer to his madness, making his bond with Batman feel like a never-ending toxic dance. By the time you read a modern Joker story, you're feeling the weight of thousands of previous issues where he's tortured the Bat family. To a lot of us, he's not just a character. He's a multi-generational trauma that won't stop laughing. 80 years is a long time to spend trying to get a man in a bat suit to crack a smile, but you have to admire the dedication. Number 3, Continuity versus Contract. The saddest part of movie villains is that eventually the actor wants to do an indie film where they just get too old to do backflips. When an actor leaves, the character usually dies or gets a weird recast that everyone tries to ignore. Comic villains are made of ink, which means they are immortal and don't need a pension plan. They could keep their original look or history for decades, allowing for a level of character growth that is impossible in Hollywood. Dr. Doom has been the boss of Latveria since 1962, and he's never had to worry about a contract dispute or his knees giving out. because he stays the same guy we've seen him go from a simple rival of the Fantastic Four to a guy who literally saved the multiverse and became a god for a while. In Secret Wars, he actually won and remade reality in his own image, which is a level of character progression you can only get with 60 years of uninterrupted storytelling. He doesn't need a reboot to be relevant. He just needs a new plan and a fresh coat of green paint on his cloak. He is a constant, unchanging pillar of arrogance that will be here long after we're all gone. The end note. Truth is, movies are a fun distraction, but comics are where the real work gets done. They give villains the space to be weird, the voice to be heard, and the time to never truly die. While Hollywood is busy trying to make everything look realistic, comics are busy making things look legendary. We love these villains because they represent the parts of us that are messy, ambitious, and a little bit dramatic, and they do it without ever having to worry about a special effects budget. So next time you see a villain on the big screen, just remember that their paper and ink version is probably somewhere in a comic shop, doing something 10 times more insane and looking way cooler while doing it. The page is where the masters live, and the rest of the world is just trying to catch up. After all, it's much harder to kill an idea than it is to kill an actor's interest in a franchise. That's it for this one. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss a drop. Craving more stories from comics, movies, and beyond? Check out this video right here. Cheers, and see you in the next one.